How's it going, everybody? Rob here, back with another video. And with this one, I'm going to be doing a reaction that I have been on and off saying that I'm going to do, but haven't had the motivation to. And mostly because, well, the backlash, or at least some of the, not so much the backlash, but just some of the controversy in this topic. Or I should say the controversy with the individual involved in this topic. That, of course, being Anita Sarkeesian, who created her Trump's First Women in Video Games videos. So periodically I'm going to, or at least I want to tackle each of the Tropes First Women videos, or in video games, videos from Anita Sarkeesian, and give my own personal thoughts. And also, one thing I want to really stress is that when I respond, something that I'm going to acknowledge is the fact that, in terms of, and this is going to be the difference between me and Anita Sarkeesian, is in the situation of how she talks about video games. Me, myself, when it comes to my responses, I am responding in the fact that, thinking about that, the possibility of individuals, not just men, but also women, playing some of the video games that she discusses, and their thoughts, or what I don't want to say I'm assuming, but the possibility of, initial reaction, or scenario of, again, women also playing some of the games that Anita discusses. So without further delay, let's go ahead and get right into this.
Mario! Help!
Okay, so this is the first part, Damsel in Distress Part 1. Okay.
Welcome to our multi-part video series exploring the roles and representations of women in video games. This project will examine the tropes, plot devices, and patterns most commonly associated with women in gaming from a systemic, big-picture perspective.
Sure.
This series will include critical analysis of many beloved games and characters, but remember that it's both possible, and even necessary, to simultaneously enjoy media while also being critical of its more problematic or pernicious aspects.
I would believe that, though. I mean, in terms of the response that a lot of people were getting, especially with people who were critical of your videos and initially classifying them as bigots, or other buzzwords because they had a difference of opinion than you. No offense.
So, without further ado, let's jump right into the Damsel in Distress. Let's start with the story of a game that no one ever got to play. Back in 1999, game developer Rare was hard at work on a new original title for the Nintendo 64 called Dinosaur Planet.
So I want to point out, hold on. So I know about this story. So just focus on that this was initially for the Nintendo 64. Now, for those who don't know, Dinosaur Planet did become what would be the kind of the backbone for one of the Star Fox games that was released on the GameCube. And although the concept itself being somewhat interesting for Dinosaur Planet, I can only assume the lengths that they were trying to go through in order to make the game. But anyway.
The game was to star a 16-year-old hero named Crystal as one of two playable protagonists. She was tasked with traveling through time, fighting prehistoric monsters with her magical staff, and saving the world. She was strong, she was capable, and she was heroic.
And who might you be, animal girl?
My name is Crystal.
Pretty cool, right? Well, it would have been, except the game never got released. As development on the project neared completion, legendary game designer Shigeru Miyamoto joked about how he thought it should be the third installment in his Star Fox franchise instead. Over the next 2 years, he and Nintendo did just that. They rewrote and redesigned the game and released it as Star Fox Adventures for the GameCube in 2002.
I'll admit, in terms of, it was an interesting concept for Star Fox game, but I'm not gonna lie, I kind of consider it to be kind of lackluster. So, also, kind of in terms of like the, the cover art, very dishonest because you don't, in terms of like, during Star Fox Adventures, the only one that's going on the adventure is actually Star Fox. Peppy and Toad are basically just on the ship doing nothing throughout the game. Okay, maybe, giving advice or, helping with the occasional gadget or something, but, they're just sitting on the ship. You don't see them besides, on the hologram. So the game itself was lackluster.
In this revamped version, the would-be protagonist Crystal has been transformed into a damsel in distress and spends the vast majority of the game trapped inside a crystal prison, waiting to be rescued by the new hero, Fox McCloud. The in-game action sequences that were originally built for Crystal were converted to feature Fox instead. Crystal is given a skimpier, more sexualized outfit.
Wow, she's beautiful.
Okay, I know that Anita's going to comment on this. I know this scene. Yeah, this was kind of dumb. This was dumb.
What am I doing?
And yes, that is cheesy saxophone music playing to make sure it's crystal clear that she is now an object of desire, even while in suspended animation.
Not really. At least for the player. To an extent, those that are playing Star Fox are, playing it to play for the adventure. Again, even though it's lackluster.
To add insult to injury, Fox is now using her magical staff to fight his way through the game to save her. The tale of how Crystal went from protagonist of her own epic adventure to the passive victim in someone else's game illustrates how the damsel in distress trope disempowers female characters and robs them of the chance to be heroes in their own right. The term damsel in distress is a translation of the French demoiselle en détresse.
Just out of curiosity. Okay, no, she's right. Wait. Double check.
Demoiselle simply means young lady, while détresse means roughly anxiety or despair caused by a sense of abandonment, helplessness, or danger. As a trope, the damsel in distress is a plot device in which a female character is placed in a perilous situation from which she cannot escape on her own and must be rescued by a male character.
Although I will admit that was a trope that was used a lot over the years. It does seem like that trope has evolved where it's not just women that are rescued, but also men. And if anything, it's women that also do the rescuing. Now, I'm also going to add the fact that in terms of like this trope being used in situations of like film, for instance, where you have characters like Ripley from Alien, who, to an extent, at first becomes a weak character, or at first is a weak character, only to become a stronger character, and does whatever she can to protect those she cares about. Like, for instance, in Aliens, where she is trying to protect Newt from the Queen alien in both the Hive as well as towards the end game of the film. So, ultimately, I do think that the damsel in distress trope has evolved, where, again, it's not just men, or it's not just men that do the saving, but also women in their own right.
Usually providing the core incentive or motivation for the protagonist's quest. In video games, this is most often accomplished via kidnapping, but it can also take the form of petrification or demon possession, for example. Traditionally, the woman in distress is a family member or a love interest of the hero. Princesses, wives, girlfriends, and sisters are all commonly used to fill the role. Of course, the damsel in distress predates the invention of video games by several thousand years. The trope can be traced back to ancient Greek mythology with the tale of Perseus. According to the myth, Andromeda is about to be devoured by a sea monster after being chained naked to a rock as human sacrifice. Perseus slays the beast, rescues the princess, and then claims her as his wife.
Again, I have to go back to, time has progressed where this trope has changed. Yes, there are moments in history where that was kind of the through line, where, men save women. Again, basic. That's how it was. But it has evolved. So I can't agree with the fact that, it's just men doing it. Women in some of their own stories are doing it as well, where they are saving people.
In the Middle Ages, the damsel in distress was a common feature in many medieval songs, legends, and fairy tales. The saving of a defenseless woman was often portrayed as the raison d'être, or reason for existence, in romance tales and poems of the era, involving a knight-errant, the wandering knight adventuring to prove his chivalry, prowess, and virtue. At the turn of the 20th century, victimized young women became the cliché of choice for the nascent American film industry, as it provided an easy and sensational plot device for the silver screen. A famous early example is the 1913 Keystone Cops short Barney Oldfield's Race for a Life, which features the now iconic scene of a woman being tied to the railroad tracks by an evil mustache-twirling villain.
I know I keep repeating myself, but again, I think this is more of, of what happened during the times. As years pass, ideas tend to change. And in terms of the ideas of, the damsel in distress, or, I guess at this point, those that are in distress, again, it's not just men that do the saving. Although I can understand, again, the historical factor of it, but at the same time, does it really have much relevance now, considering that in a variety of games, we see women in their own right doing things for others?
Around the same time, the motif of a giant monkey carrying away a screaming woman began to gain widespread popularity in media of all kinds. Notably, Tarzan's love interest, Jane, is captured by a brutish primate in Edgar Rice Burroughs' 1912 pulp adventure, Tarzan and the Apes. In 1930, Walt Disney used this meme in an early Mickey Mouse cartoon called The Gorilla Mystery.
Interesting.
The imagery was even exploited by the U.S. military in this recruitment poster for World War I.
Oh.
But it was in 1933 that two things happened, which 50 years later would set the stage for the damsel in distress trope to become a foundational element in video games as a medium.
Okay.
First, Paramount Pictures introduced their animated series Popeye the Sailor to cinema audiences. The formula for most shorts would involve Popeye rescuing a kidnapped olive oil. Second, in March of that year, RKO Pictures releases its groundbreaking hit film King Kong, in which a giant ape abducts a young woman and is eventually killed while trying to keep possession of her. Fast forward to 1981, when a Japanese company named Nintendo entrusted a young designer named Shigeru Miyamoto with the task of creating a new arcade game for the American market. Originally, the project was conceived of as a game starring Popeye the Sailor. But when Nintendo wasn't able to secure the rights, Miyamoto created his own characters to fill the void, heavily influenced by the movie King Kong. The game's hero Jumpman was tasked with rescuing a damsel named the Lady after she's carried off by a giant ape. In later versions, she's renamed Pauline.
Okay.
Although Donkey Kong is perhaps the most famous early arcade game to feature the damsel in distress, it wasn't the first time Miyamoto employed the trope.
Okay.
2 years earlier, he had a hand in designing a 1979 arcade game called Sheriff. In it, a vague female-shaped collection of pixels, referred to as the Beauty, must be rescued from a pack of bandits. The hero is then rewarded with a smooch of victory for his bravery in the end. A few years later, Miyamoto recycled his Donkey Kong character designs. Pauline became the template for a new damsel named Princess Toadstool, and Jumpman became a certain very famous plumber
Yeah, wasn't this like yeah, it was the Japanese movie. Oh my gosh. I still need to watch that.
Princess Peach is in many ways the quintessential stock character version of the damsel in distress. The ill-fated princess appears in 14 of the core Super Mario Bros. Platformer games, and she's kidnapped in 13 of them.
So, there's a point I want to make, but I want to save it because there are games where, you know, I mean, for instance, there is one particular game where because recently, in I think it was like the recent year that I'm recording this video, they released a second Peach game that it basically just focuses on her and not Mario, where she is the lead in the game.
The North American release of Super Mario Bros. 2 in 1988 remains the only game in the core series in which Peach is not kidnapped, and also the only game in which she's a playable character. Though it should be noted, it wasn't originally created to be a Mario game at all. The game was originally released in Japan under a completely different title called Yumi Kojo Doki Doki Panic, which roughly translates to Dream Factory Heart Pounding Panic.
Yep. I'm gonna say it was really weird that they did that, where they took Doki Doki Panic and reskinned it to be a Mario game. I will say that was an odd choice.
Nintendo of America thought that the original Japanese release of Super Mario Bros. 2 was too difficult and too similar to the first game, so they reskinned and redesigned Doki Doki Panic to star Mario and Luigi instead. However, the Japanese game already had 4 playable characters.
Yep.
So the designers opted to include Toad and the princess to fill the 2 remaining slots, building directly on top of the pre-existing character models.
Yep.
So really, if we're honest, Peach is kind of accidentally playable in this.
I don't think that's the case. I mean, in terms of like who else were they gonna pick? Bowser? Yeah, like that's smart, but I wouldn't classify that as being accidental. I mean, yes, it is to an extent, created over a already original game, but with them, putting Peach in there, I mean, again, who else are they going to pick? A Koopa? A Goomba? For, the fourth playable character? I mean, who else are they going to pick? I think it makes sense that they used Peach for I almost said Doki Doki, but for the second Mario game.
This one. Still, she had the awesome ability to float for short distances, which came in really handy, especially in the ice levels.
Yeah.
Sadly, Peach has never been a playable character again in the main franchise.
And I do want to point out that, again, she has her own games. I mean, granted, yeah, she's not part of the main... Actually, no, because to an extent, she is playable in the Mario RPG as well. But there are moments where she is playable in games. Because she is a damsel in other games, do we just immediately discard her character or discard the games where she is doing her own thing? I have to ask that question, because I think that's what Anita is trying to say.
Even with newer games that feature 4-player options like the new Super Mario Bros. Wii and Wii U, the princess is still excluded from the action. She's been replaced with another Toad instead, as to allow Nintendo to force her back into the damsel role again and again.
I think the only excuse that I can come up with is, well, to an extent, unfortunately. I mean, unfortunately for Anita, I did it again. But unfortunately for Anita, but as anybody can probably guess, Mario is the main staple of the franchise. So there is going to be a ton of games where he is the hero in that story. Again, does it really devalue her character for, at times having to be rescued, when in other games, and it's funny that she's in this part now. They're showing the spin-off games where you get to play as her, and she is kind of a badass. I mean, really? And also, let's not forget, I hate to add, other media as well, but, can we not forget the fact that, in the comics, the old Nintendo Power comics, you have Peach kind of being a badass and doing her own thing, taking charge, taking action, and then also, let's not forget that I would have to say I would have to assume it inspired their direction for Peach in the Illumination movie, where Peach is, right off the bat, a better protagonist than Mario in the film. Where she is, fully capable of doing a lot of things that she can do in the Mushroom Kingdom. So, in terms of, just claiming her to be a damsel in distress, I mean, I wouldn't... There are times where, yes, she is a damsel, but she does do things in other games as well. I'm not gonna... I don't think we should write them off because they're spin-off games or they're other media. There are other times where she is doing her own thing.
Peach does of course appear in many spin-offs such as the Mario Party, Mario Sports, and Mario Kart series, as well as the Super Smash Bros. Nintendo Universe crossover fighting games. However, all of these spin-offs fall well outside of the core Super Mario series of platformers.
Which I don't think...
She is the star of only one...
Which I don't think that we need to... I don't think we should be, devaluing her because they're spin-off games. And especially with her having her own game. Regardless of how you feel about the game, it's her as the hero.
One adventure, and we'll get to that a little later. One way to think about damsel characters is via what's called the subject-object dichotomy. In the simplest terms, subjects act, and objects are acted upon.
That's so stupid.
The subject is the protagonist, the one who the story is centered on, and the one doing most of the action. In video games, this is almost always the main playable character, and the one from whose perspective most of the story is seen. So the damsel trope typically makes men the subject of narratives, while relegating women to the role of object. This is a form of objectification because as objects, damseled women are being acted upon.
How exactly? So she's about to say becoming or reduced to a prize or one, treasure to be found or a goal to achieve. I mean, when somebody's playing a game, I mean, granted, I mean, yeah, the goal is to, find this treasure, save the princess, do this or do that. But in reality, I mean, when somebody plays a video game, more often than not, their main focus is just playing the game. There's no type of like sexualized reason for them to play the game. And also, in terms of this this comment of of what she's talking about, I want to kind of put in perspective the idea of women, not just men, playing a lot of the games that Anita is talking about. So in terms of this what she called it, the subject object dichotomy, where you have
dichotomy.
Yeah, where basically the player character treats the damsel as the prize. I mean, in terms of I guess men saving women, I mean, both, again, putting into the idea that men and also women playing this game or playing these games, would that imply that women are also taking part in this sort of subject / object dichotomy? It's not just men. If that was the situation where they are like, that was their like only reason for playing the game, to save the damsel, to collect the treasure, to do this, to do that, ultimately, again, I feel like that's not the only motivation for somebody, not just men but also women, that play video games. We play video games because we enjoy the game, we enjoy the stories, we enjoy the characters, as well as, enjoy the adventure. Why do people play Legend of Zelda, like the most recent Legend of Zeldas? For the story, especially with like Breath of the Wild, Tears of the Kingdom, where you have a extensive source of adventure and exploration and discovery, where you can do as much as you can, and with a large enough map to not go on a set direction but take detours if you need to get what you need to prepare and to push forward through the storyline. It's not just women, or sorry, it's not just men that play these games, but again, also women that play these games.
Found, or a goal to be achieved. The brief intro sequence accompanying many classic arcade games tends to reinforce the framing of women as a possession that's been stolen from the protagonist.
I have to point out again, I mean, it's with a lot of these arguments, again, it's the historical aspect of it, but as history progresses, or as time is, as we move towards the present, these types of tropes either change or are discarded. So a lot of times, a lot of these old tropes, are no longer used. And if anything, again, they change the storyline, where it's, again, initially, in terms of history, with a lot of stories, yes, it was men. But it has now been changed, where women are also the badasses, are also the people that take charge to do what they need to do.
The hero's fight to retrieve his stolen property then provides the lazy justification for the actual game.
I feel like I'm just gonna say it. I feel it's so dishonest to just classify the female character as a property, and call it lazy justification. I mean, I that's the mindset of an ESUKC. By the way, I love this. I'm sorry, this image right here is funny, but I think it's I like listening to this. Like, again, I'm not playing the game for the sake of trying to save. I mean, that's the goal, yes, but I'm more of playing the game for the challenge, because if I remember correctly, this was the game in question, or at least the game connected to this image for this night was very challenging. So overall, a lot of people, they're not playing it just to save the princess. They're playing it because the game is hard and they want to challenge themselves. Why do you think especially with like games like, let's say, Dark Souls, Bloodborne, Elden Ring, Life of P, for example, where they're all Souls games. I mean, there's no real damsel in distress in that. You are literally challenging yourself in those types of games. I mean, again, the tropes, or at least the motivations to playing games, has really, really changed over the years, where people have different reasons for playing video games. People play puzzle games because they are interested in puzzles and they want to challenge themselves. And again, this is more of, wanting to challenge yourself in a lot of these games. People play God of War because, to an extent, I mean, and I'm talking about both the Greek mythos and the Norse mythos God of Wars, where people, to an extent, enjoy the story and are especially with I would say curious about the fact that you have a character like Kratos, who in the Greek mythos is this bloodthirsty monster who doesn't care about the well-being of others, who is mainly focused on revenge. To see him grow and basically become more of a semi-compassionate individual. Like right now, out of all the games, my favorite has to be Ragnarok, because, and ironically, one of the original creators of the God of War trilogy really hated what they did with Kratos. But if you really think about it, it really goes to show how much change from those games, from the Greek mythos and the Norse mythos, there has been with Kratos, where you have a character who's been broken down, who was able to find some reason to live again, to via his wife, and then and to an extent his son. And throughout the first game, for the Norse mythos, by the way, him basically trying to scatter his wife's ashes to find out that his son is part of this prophecy. And in the last game, basically, trying to further prepare his son for the future, and by the end having to let him go, as well as a character, again, who more likely hated himself throughout the series, learning to appreciate himself and try to be a better person. all in all, again, the motivations of why we play video games or the motivations for gameplay has changed over the years. And I know I've kind of went on a diatribe, but overall, this idea, like this comment, the hero fights to retrieve his stolen property, and which provides a lazy justification for actual gameplay, is utterly ridiculous. Because, to an extent, first of all, again, just to try to, just denounce the presence of a character by calling them property is, I would say, genuinely dishonest, if you ask me.
At its heart, the damsel trope is not really about women at all. She simply becomes the central object in a competition between men, at least in its traditional incarnations.
Note that. Traditional incarnations. Again, these sort of tropes have changed. They're no longer the way they were years ago. There has been improvements over the years.
I've heard it said that in the game of patriarchy, women are not the opposing team, they are the ball.
No.
So for example, we can think of the Super Mario franchise as a grand game being played between Mario and Bowser, and Princess Peach's role is essentially that of the ball. The two men are tossing her back and forth over the course of the main series, each trying to keep and take possession of the damsel ball.
I don't agree with that.
Even though Nintendo certainly didn't invent the damsel in distress, the popularity of their Save the Princess formula essentially set the standard for the industry. The trope quickly became the go-to motivational hook for developers, as it provided an easy way to tap into adolescent male power fantasies.
Wizard of Warriors.
In order to sell more games to young straight boys and men.
But again, I have to point out again, like, just kind of put in perspective that it's not just men that more likely played some of these games, but also women. So, if in that mindset, does that imply that women's motivations were just to treat other women as, objects to obtain because, they're trying to, save the quote-unquote damsel in distress?
Please help me, please!
Throughout the 80s and 90s, the trope became so prevalent that it would be nearly impossible to mention them all. There were literally hundreds of examples showing up in platformers, side-scrolling beat-em-ups, first-person shooters, and role-playing games alike.
Okay.
Let's take a quick moment to clear up some common misconceptions about this trope. As a
I feel like we've been doing that, but okay.
plot device, the damsel in distress is often grouped with other separate tropes, including the designated victim, the heroic rescue, and the smooch of victory. However, it's important to remember that these associated conventions are not necessarily a part of the damsel in distress trope itself. So the woman in question may or may not play the victim role for the entire game or series, while our brave hero may or may not be successful in his rescue attempt.
Which does happen in games.
All that is really required to fulfill the damsel in distress trope is for a female character to be reduced to a state of helplessness, from which she requires rescuing by a typically male hero for the benefit of his story arc.
And what about characters in, like, other stories where the men become the victim, or the men initially, aren't able to help themselves, or in terms of, the situation at hand, they lose control of the situation. And normally, in terms of, like, the female protagonists, they end up taking part in trying to help the situation.
This brings us to the other famous Nintendo princess. In 1986, Shigeru Miyamoto doubled down on his damsel in distress formula with the NES release of The Legend of Zelda. This was the first in what would become one of the most beloved action-adventure game franchises of all time.
The Legend of Zelda continues.
Okay, I haven't played The Legend of Zelda 2, but I have heard it's bad. Like, it was way different from initially what was created for the first game.
Zelda 2, The Adventure of Link, Nintendo. Now you're playing with power.
Over the course of more than a dozen games spanning a quarter century, all of the incarnations of Princess Zelda have been kidnapped, cursed, possessed, turned to stone, or otherwise disempowered at some.
So, I want to point something out, because it's interesting that she added the Oracle of Seasons and the Oracle of Ages, because initially with those two games, if I recall, Zelda doesn't show up unless you continue, so you unless you play New Game Plus via a code that you get from beating one of the two games. So with those two games, which honestly, Nintendo, please port or remake Oracle of Ages and Seasons, because I love those games. But anyway, gosh, can you only? Sorry, I gotta go off topic for a second. But can you imagine like a redone version of Oracle and Season, Oracle and Ages, or Oracle of Seasons and Ages? That would be so freaking cool. Like having it on the Switch. But anyways, yeah, for those games, I mean, yes, there is a damsel, but it's not Zelda. It's I can't remember the characters' names, but you have the Oracle of Ages in her game and the Oracle of Seasons in her respective game. And yes, they are damsels in distress, but to some extent, their abilities do help with the defeat of the main villain of each of those staple games. Now, again, there is the chance of Zelda showing up in the game via playing New Game Plus by using a code that you would receive towards the end of playing either Legend of Zelda, Oracle of Ages or Seasons, and that is initially when you have Zelda captured by Twin Rova to summon Ganon. But again, as far as I can remember, she does not show up in those two Game Boy games. So to an extent, and plus those are, I don't know if I can classify those as like, inline staple games, but anyway, whatever.
At some point. Zelda has never been the star in her own adventure, nor been a true playable character in the core series. However, it must be said that not all damsels are created equal, and Zelda is occasionally given a more active or integral role to play than her counterpart in the Mushroom Kingdom.
Yeah, I mean, to an extent, there are moments in the games where Zelda is literally helping towards the, final cut of the game.
Unlike Peach, Zelda is not completely defined by her role as Ganondorf's perpetual kidnap victim, and in a few later games, she even rides the line between damsel and sidekick. Remember, the damsel in distress's plot device is something that happens to a female character.
Again, going into the idea that men can also become the damsel. I mean, it's happened before in, media before. in recent years. So,
and not necessarily something a character is from start to finish. Once in a while, she might be given the opportunity to have a slightly more active role in facilitating the hero's quest, typically by opening doors, giving hints, power-ups, and other helpful items.
So she's going to call it the helpful. I mean, does that devalue her character because she assists at times? I mean, that doesn't. So, we just shrug her off because she does, a few things that helps. I mean, and the only thing we can think, and the only like ultimatum to her character is the fact that she's a damsel. Yeah, that's a good way to put it. I mean, that's, to an extent. I mean, again, with her, in various games, as well as, moments where she is literally helping Link. I don't think that should devalue her to just being a damsel.
Call this variant on the theme the helpful damsel. Indeed, Zelda is at her best when she takes the form of Sheik in Ocarina of Time and Tetra in The Wind Waker.
So I want to point out something is by the time that this game, or this video, this video came out in 2013, we received Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, where throughout the game, she's stuck in Hyrule Castle, but she is keeping Ganon at bay. So the entire time, and she's not, and I wouldn't even classify her as being a damsel in that. For the most part, she's basically been stuck in a stalemate for 100 years just to keep this monstrosity from escaping. So, in terms of like what she is and what she's doing in the game, she is in a perpetual battle in that particular game. Now, something I also want to bring up is the follow-up game after that, Tears of the Kingdom, where her character does a lot more, and I would be, if I get a response for this video, I'd be surprised if somebody tried to claim that she was damsel in that, considering the fact that in that game she's basically pushed into the past, and to some extent helps to basically, to some degree, prepare the future for the return of Ganondorf. She fights alongside the initial sages. She is, learning these abilities from the, I think they're called the Sage's Stones. I can't remember what they're called. But she is doing a lot in that game. And by the end, when Ganondorf is basically, again, kind of put in a stalemate and left to basically slumber for thousands of years, what does she do? She sacrifices herself. It's made aware, or aware to us in the game that, and by the way, spoilers for those who have never played the game, it's made aware that the stone that she wears in that game, if devoured, turns you into an immortal dragon. And in order to prepare Link and assist him in the future, she takes what was the destroyed Master Sword and swallows the stone, not only becoming an immortal dragon, but from her and imbuing it with light, restores and empowers the Master Sword. So to just ultimately claim that she is a damsel in distress is, again, there are moments where she is captured, but that's not just her character. There's more to her than that. And I'm going to add to the other games like Hyrule Warriors, where she is doing or taking part in the battle. Yeah, that could be a spin-off game, but at the same time, she is playable in that game, and she does a lot. So to just classify her as a damsel, even though that's not completely her character, I'm gonna be honest, it just feels dishonest. Even with her, about, at this point with her, because I know bits and pieces of this video. Even though in Anita's eyes, even though she does a few things, she's still a damsel, and that's all she should be, or she is equated to, which is, again, I would say, dishonest.
In Ocarina of Time, Zelda avoids capture for the first 3/4 of the game. Disguised as Sheik, she is a helpful and active participant in the adventure, and she's shown to be more than capable. However, as soon as she transforms back into her more stereotypically feminine form of Princess Zelda, she's captured within 3 minutes. Literally 3 minutes. I timed it. Her rescue then becomes central to the end of Link's quest. Similarly, in the Wind Waker...
Well, I mean, let's face it, the main focus is defeating Ganon. Whether Zelda or Link survives, that's the main goal, is to defeat Ganon, to defeat evil. Yes, saving Zelda ends up becoming part of it, but the main objective, ultimately, is, to defeat the person who caused the evil in the first place.
Waker, Tetra is a feisty and impressive young pirate captain. But as soon as she's revealed to be and transformed into her more stereotypically feminine form of Princess Zelda, she's told that she's no longer allowed to accompany Link on the adventure because it's suddenly too dangerous for her. She's ordered to wait in the castle, which she does until she's eventually kidnapped, while waiting obediently in the same spot. It is noteworthy that in the very last stage of the boss battle, she does help Link fight Ganondorf for a few brief minutes, which is a refreshing change.
Which she does in later games too.
However, the next time Tetra's incarnation appears in 2007's The Phantom Hourglass, she's kidnapped immediately during the intro. Later, she's turned to stone and then kidnapped for a second time. It's disappointing that even with her moments of heroism, Zelda is still damseled. She is removed from the action, pushed aside, and made helpless at least once in every game she appears in.
Am I the only one who thinks of Conan the Barbarian when this music starts playing? Because I think that's where this music originated from. But there's something I want to ask about, in terms of the characters. Each character has their own strengths and weaknesses. And while, again, unfortunately, yeah, Zelda, characters like Zelda, they do get kidnapped, but when they are able to do what they can, they have, a different skill set compared to what the hero could possibly have. Good Lord.
This brings us to one of the core reasons why the trope is so problematic and pernicious for women's representations. The damsel in distress is not just a synonym for weak. Instead, it works by ripping away the power from female characters, even helpful or seemingly capable ones.
Nah. I want to say I half agree, but at the same time, each of these characters more likely have their own strengths and weaknesses. And yes, they do end up getting captured, but I wouldn't devalue them to just being a damsel.
No matter what we're told about their magical abilities, skills, or strengths, they're still ultimately captured or otherwise incapacitated and then must wait for rescue. Distilled down to its essence, the plot device works by trading the disempowerment of female characters for the empowerment of male characters.
Which has changed over the years. Again, I know I keep going back to that, but it has changed where women are empowered. It's not just men anymore. I think even when this video was being made, there were female characters where they were empowered and doing their own thing. It's not just men.
Let's compare the damsel to the archetypal hero myth, in which a typically male character may occasionally also be harmed, incapacitated, or briefly imprisoned at some point during their journey. In these situations, the character relies on their intelligence, cunning, and skill to engineer their own escape.
That's better.
Okay.
Or, just punching a hole in the prison wall works too. The point is, they're ultimately able to gain back their own freedom. In fact, that process of overcoming the ordeal is an important step in the protagonist's transformation into a heroic figure. A damseled woman, on the other hand, is shown as incapable of escaping the predicament on her own, and then must wait for a savior to come into it for her.
I keep hating to repeat myself, but that trope has changed. The idea of the damsel in distress trope has changed over the years. It's really weird that you just hyper focus on, women that are affected by this.
In this way, the damsel's ordeal is not her own. Instead, it's framed as a trial for the hero to overcome. Consequently, the trope robs women in peril from the opportunity of being the architects of their own escape, and therefore prevents them from becoming archetypal heroes themselves. Today, many old-school damsel games are being resurrected for modern platforms, services, and mobile devices, as publishers are in a rush to cash in on gaming nostalgia and capitalize on any recognizable characters from years gone by. For example, Sega's 1993 platformer Sonic CD, featuring a damseled Amy Rose, has been enhanced and made available for download on a wide variety of modern platforms.
Yeah, but in later games, doesn't she do more? I mean, she's a playable character in the Sonic Adventure games. And then in Sonic Heroes, her Cream and Big the Cat are part of their own team. One of the 4 teams, I should add, that you play as in order to, go on this adventure to fight Eggman. So it's not just, again, her character. They did more of her character over the years.
Jordan Mechner's famous Karateka and Prince of Persia games, originally released for the Apple II home computer in the 1980s, have both seen modern HD remakes. And the 1983 animated Laserdisc game Dragon's Lair, with ditzy Princess Daphne, has been ported to just about every system imaginable.
Although I enjoy the art style from Don Bluth in that game, and for those who have probably seen our Let's Play, our live stream of me playing those 2 games, F Dragon's Lair. That game almost made me go insane. F that game. I appreciate it for what it is, but good lord, I almost went insane with that.
Please save me. The cage is locked with a key. The dragon keeps it around his neck. To slay the dragon, use the magic sword.
Remember Pauline, damsel of the classic Donkey Kong arcade? Well, she's also been revived. First in 1994's Donkey Kong for the Game Boy, and later in the Mario vs. Donkey Kong series for the Nintendo DS.
Yeah, I have to go back to, talking about a later game, because, again, they do more with her character throughout, in terms of like in the future, like after this video is made. In Super Mario Odyssey, they do reintroduce Pauline, but she's like Mayor Pauline of the city area that you get to explore. And then in, again, the Illuminations Super Mario movie, she's mayor of, was it New York? So I thought that was kind of jarring. But overall, I mean, either she's mayor or she's a newscaster, but either way, she does make a reappearance. So she's not some damsel in distress in later games, or later media, I should say.
Each game features a rehashing of the old excuse plot, with Pauline being whisked away by the giant ape during the opening credits. The now iconic opening seconds of the 1987 beat-em-up arcade game Double Dragon has Marion being punched in the stomach, thrown over the shoulder of a thug, and carried away. In several versions, her panties are clearly shown to the player while she's being abducted.
Okay.
The game has been remade, re-released, and ported to dozens of systems over the past 25 years, ensuring that Marion will be battered and damseled for each new generation to enjoy. Most recently, Double Dragon Neon in 2012 reintroduced new gamers to this regressive crap yet again, this time in full HD. The pattern of presenting women as fundamentally weak, ineffective, or ultimately incapable has larger ramifications beyond the characters themselves and the specific games they inhabit. We have to remember that these games don't exist in a vacuum. They are an increasingly important and influential part of our larger social and cultural ecosystem. The reality is, this trope is being used in a real-world context where backward sexist attitudes are already rampant.
I want to say I half agree, but I don't fully agree. Because in terms of what's in a video game, basically what's in fiction, I'm not going to equate that, and I don't think a lot of people should equate that to what's happening in real life. And I'm going to have a little bit to say about that.
It's a sad fact that a large percentage of the world's population still clings to the deeply sexist belief that women as a group need to be sheltered, protected, and taken care of by men.
I will say that this sort of notion, again, real world notion, has changed over the years. Yes, there are men, not all men, there are men that do have this sort of notion, but there are also men that, treat, women, especially women that are in a relationship with a man, as a partner, somebody who, to an extent, is an extension of, their own strengths. And for the most part, in that relationship, both the man and the woman feed off of those strengths and weaknesses. This is a notion that isn't fully utilized by all men. Again, some men, but not all.
The belief that women are somehow a naturally weaker gender is a deeply ingrained, socially constructed myth, which of course is completely false, but the notion is reinforced and perpetuated when women are continuously portrayed as frail, fragile, and vulnerable creatures.
I want to say that in terms of like strengths, there are certain strengths that men will have, and there are certain strengths that women have. It's interesting with like games like, let's say, Resident Evil, where you play as either Chris or Jill. Chris is more of a strength-based character, whereas Jill is more of an intelligence-based character, where she's able to do a lot more in terms of like, let's say, lock picking, mixing chemicals and solutions to create an antidote for snake venom, to doing all these other things. Again, especially with a lot of media and a lot of media in the past going to the present, it does show, I mean, to some extent, that not everybody, and I hate to be the one to say this, but not everybody is created equally. Each person, and I'm not just talking about men and women as groups, but each person, whether it be in a video game, media, real life, etc., each person has their own strengths or weaknesses. And especially with like media and video games and stuff like that, each character will have their own situations where either they can be the character of the hero, or the character who is the assist hero, or unfortunately in some situations the damsel. But all in all, I mean, each character has their own strengths and weaknesses.
Just to be clear, I'm not saying that all games that use the damsel in distress as a plot device are automatically sexist or have no value.
That's kind of what you've been doing, unfortunately.
But it's undeniable that popular culture is a powerful influence in our lives, and the damsel in distress trope as a recurring trend does help to normalize extremely toxic, patronizing, and paternalistic attitudes about women.
I feel like if there's anything, if there's anyone to blame for that, I mean, again, over time those tropes have changed, and I think if there's anybody who should be accused of those types of notions to creating that sort of through line, this kind of like thread, is Anita Sarkeesian, because she has made it her career to basically try to downplay the successes of women in video games, to try to make it seem like all men are sexist, all men are evil, that you should just call it out and nobody should have a say in the matter. Now, another thing too, and because there's something really important that I want to talk about, because I will say slightly, videos like this little bit irritate me, and I've been I'm trying to be respectful as best as I can in terms of this response, but in terms of listening to some of the things she's saying, especially with me personally, my knowledge of video games, knowing some of the history of video games, and what has transpired over the years in terms of like changing certain notions, me personally, some of the things she says somewhat feel disingenuous.
Now, I grew up on Nintendo. I've been a fan of the Mario and Zelda franchises for most of my life, and they'll always have a special place in my heart, as I'm sure is true for a great number of gamers out there. But it's still important to recognize and think critically about the more problematic aspects, especially considering many of these franchises are as popular as ever, and the characters have become worldwide icons. The good news is that there's nothing stopping developers from evolving their gender representations and making more women heroes in their future games. It'd be great to finally see Zelda, Sheik, and Tetra as the protagonists of their own games. And not just...
It's, just out of curiosity, okay, I wanted to quickly look something up, because it's interesting she says that, because there are other games where you have a female lead who is the main character, the main focus of their game. But I would have to guess that the reason she doesn't point them out is the fact that some of them are not to her liking. I mean, characters like Bayonetta, who, by the way, her game came out or that game, the first game of Bayonetta, came out in 2009. So about 4 years before this video was released. Characters in Perfect Dark, also, female lead. Or was it Perfect Dark? I just want to double check. Sorry, but yeah, Perfect Dark. I believe he had a female character in Dino Crisis. Resident Evil, again, another female lead where she is, dealing with, a mansion full of zombies. You have female leads that are or can be the main, hero when they are in their own story. In fact, even going further on to Resident Evil, Jill plays as the main character, the only character you play as in Resident Evil 3. So, to try to claim, that, this, just focusing on these characters, as if, we need to change some kind of, like, dichotomy, some kind of, like, notion of how characters are portrayed, is utterly ridiculous, considering the fact that, again, there are other characters in other games that are the female lead, and they're the main staple of those particular games.
Just mobile DS games. I'm talking full-on console adventures. Okay, so we've established that the damsel in distress trope is one of the most widely used gendered cliches in the history of video games.
And as I pointed out, that trope has changed over the years, but go on.
And has been core to the popularization and development of gaming as a medium. But what about more modern games? Has anything changed in the past 10 years?
Yes.
Well, stay tuned for part 2, where I'll be looking at more contemporary examples of the damsel in distress trope. We'll look at all the dark and edgy twists and turns and see how the convention has been used and abused right up until today. Then we'll check out some games where developers have tried to flip the script on the damsel.
Okay. So that was bad. That was terrible. Again, in terms of, like, these videos, I'm trying to be as respectful as I can be, in terms of these responses, but I don't fully agree with what Anita Sarkeesian is saying in this video. Like I said before numerous times in the line of this video, the trope of the damsel in distress has changed over the years, where it's not just women but also men that can be considered the damsel. Women themselves, especially in a variety of different games, have had the role as the main character to play as. And in terms of, I guess the point that she was trying to make, that this affects, real life situations, I think is completely false. Me personally, I believe that any situation related to video games, related to fiction, does not correlate to real world violence. I know that has been a tactic that has been used by a variety of politicians and many other people to try to claim that video games cause violence, video games cause sexism, video games cause racism, is completely and utter garbage. You have individuals like Glenn Beck who've tried to push this notion, including people like Bill O'Reilly and many others that try to claim that video games are evil. Glenn Beck, again, bringing him up again, is probably one of the funnier jokes, I should say, where you have an individual who has, I guess, in recent months, as I'm recording this video, has made a comment about his children not dating gamers, which is ironic, considering that, one, he more likely, one way or another won't be able to control that, because they're his kids are going to date whoever they want to date. But two, considering the fact that this person has tried to attack video games before and failed with actually kind of making himself into an utter joke, considering he tried to claim that a game like Watch Dogs could teach people how to actually hack computers in real life, makes individuals like him questionable. Even Bill O'Reilly, who again has tried to equate real life violence from games like Grand Auto Theft. By the way, that is a joke because that's something he said, that the title was called Grand Auto Theft, when in reality it is basically the title of an actual crime, which was, again, Grand Theft Auto. So, in terms of correlation of violence or sexism, racism in general, from real life and trying to equate it to what happens in video games is utter nonsense. And also, something that I want to bring up, because this is going to be a constant of this situation. And I asked somebody, I asked somebody to let me know if I'm wrong on this, but I find it amusing that an individual has spent a lot of time and money trying to target the gaming community by trying to denounce some of their tropes, to try to claim that these fictional games, these things that aren't real, cause real world violence against women, or real world or harassment against women, when in reality she doesn't focus on it. And again, this is more of like, this doesn't seem like she's focusing on what really happens in real world against women. I mean, if she was still creating videos, I would challenge her to actually discuss what's going on in other countries where women are treated as objects, like literally treated as objects. Women who are taken from their homes in third world countries, who are used and basically abused numerous times throughout the day, taken by militia groups to, have children, and those children becoming, new kid soldiers for their militias, who are women who are not even allowed to vote. And anytime that they, discuss a difference of opinion to a man, they are beaten, stoned, burned, and a variety of other forms of mistreatment. So in terms of trying to claim that real video games cause real world violence or action to real world people is utterly ridiculous, when in reality video games, as well as other forms of media, cannot be classified as an excuse for what's really going on and already going on in real life. So in terms of these videos, I want to keep responding to them, but I wanted to say my piece because this is something I don't want to repeat over and over again with these videos, is that these, even though I feel like I'm going to have to, is that these tropes, what goes on in video games, a fictional source of media, does not cause and affect what's going on in the real world. It doesn't. And no amount of trying is going to convince people, at least people that have a good head on their shoulders, that that's the case. So anyway, that is my response of the part 1 of Damsels in Distress. hopefully you guys enjoyed the video. If you guys can, and actually, you know what? If you guys have anything you'd like to add or discuss, or heck, if you want to, tell me I'm wrong, leave it in the comments. Love to hear what you guys have to say, and maybe I'll read your comments. But overall, thank you guys so much for watching. Truly appreciate it. If you guys can, please leave a like, comment, share, subscribe, all the good stuff. If you guys want to follow us on social media, it's all in the description down below. As well as check out our daily content and the weekly podcast. With that being said, this is Rob Novakast signing off. Have a good one. Take care. And I'll see you guys next video.